Hello, listeners. This is Encouraging Distraction. I'm your host, Jen. Today, as we cover Irish histories, mysteries, and legends, this week we will take a trip to Muckross Lake and Killarney National Park to dive into the story of Mucky, the Muckross monster. Muckross Lake, also known as the Torc or the Middle Lake, is a stunning landscape of mountainous natural beauty. Lush forests hug the rim of the rocky shores, dotted with wispy collections of reeds along the edges. The Middle Lake is the deepest lake of Ireland, reaching all the way down to the dark depth of 75 meters or 246 feet. The currents of the lake have chiseled out deep caves from the limestone surfaces of the shores and small islands settled in the center of the waters. The area is known for its diverse flora and fauna, specifically known as a habitat for the critically endangered blunt-nosed Irish char. It was the preservation of this fish that unearthed an ancient living legend. On the 18th of August 2003, RTE released a story regarding the Irish char conservation group's strange and startling discovery. In April 2003, the group of international scientists were working to conduct a hydroacoustic study survey, hoping to collect statistical data on the char living in the murky depths of the Torc. Methodically, in their boat, they carefully swept each meter of water, looking for evidence of the depleted population of char. As their boat rocked quietly back and forth on the water, the equipment swept at a 10-meter depth on the southeastern section of the lake, when suddenly the sonar displayed what was initially assumed an error. An image of a living creature as large as a house became apparent on the screens. A 27-foot-long serpent-like object. After further analysis, it was concluded that there were no critical errors in the equipment used in the survey of those waters. The scientists were unable to identify the creature. Dr. Fran Igo, scientific advisor of the ICCG, provided the following statement to the Irish Times. What we do know is that the fish fauna in Muckross is very ancient indeed. We have confirmed the presence of a good population of Arctic char, and the lake is known to hold farrow trout, ordinary trout, and Atlantic salmon, as well as lamprey species of eel, all of which attest to the ancient origins of this lake. Ancient indeed. It is believed that Muckross Lake was formed at the end of the warming period after the last glacial maximum, 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. Perhaps some unknown species of eel or trout has lived so long in the peaceful waters that it has grown to a stunning size. In fact, the largest conger eel ever caught was 21 feet. In modern America, urban legends exist of carp and catfish as large as buses. The myth first began circulating in the 1950s. In one version, it is said that two divers went to retrieve a car that ended up at the bottom of an artificial lake after a drunk driving accident the night before. After diving down to the bottom of the lake, large carp circled the rescuers as big as the VW bug they were trying to hook to the tow truck above. The men quickly resurfaced, telling the crowd what they saw at the bottom of the waters, vowing to never go near the lake's edge for the rest of their lives. As the story has grown bigger over the decades, More elaborate tales claim that the fish are now as large as Buicks, vans, and houses. Ireland has long been associated with serpents, but many have believed this association to be symbolic rather than literal. The Irish Celtic goddess Brigid is observed on Imbolc, which is associated with waiting serpents leaving their dens for spring as a kind of weather divination. Brigid, the Irish goddess of spring, fertility, poets, healing, and smithing, was adopted into sainthood after Ireland's conversion to Christianity. Many early Christian relics that were smithed in Ireland contain representations of snakes. In Irish literature, tales and ballads centering on the deeds of the legendary Finn MacCool and his war band, the Fiann Éireann, the heroes are recorded to have killed many water serpents. The Fiann were made up of landless young men and women, often young aristocrats who had not yet come into their inheritance of land. Finn led the elite volunteer corps of warriors and huntsmen through many dangerous adventures. Skilled in poetry as well as warcraft, the group flourished under the reign of Cormac MacCairt in the 3rd century AD. Finn, in particular, was the traditional folk hero of Ireland. Finn the Fair had many great deeds written of him. In a few tales, he is credited with the slaying of many dragons, also known as worms or serpents. From Irish Druids and old Irish religions, James Bonwick writes,
Ancient legends have frequent reference to the piasta, worm or serpent in a large body of water. It resembled a great mound. Its jaws were yawning wide. There might lie concealed, though great its fury, 100 champions in its eye pits. Taller in height than 8 men was its tail, which was erect above its back. Thicker was the most slender part of its tail than the forest oak, which was sunk by the flood. Fionn elsewhere figures in the chase of Slieve Guilleen after being won in Loch Coon. We found a serpent in that lake. His being there was no gain to us. On looking at it as we approached, his head was larger than a hill, larger than any tree in the forest. Were its tusks of the ugliest shape, wider than the portals of a city, were the ears of the serpent as we approached. He destroyed serpents in Loch Coolin, Loch Nee, Loch Ray, as well as the blue serpent of Irna, and one at Howth. He killed 2 at Glenini, 1 in the Murmuring Ban, another at Loch Cara, and beheaded a fearful creature, which cast fire at him from Loch Leary. Fionn banished from the rats each serpent he went to meet. Another poet left this version. A serpent there was in the loch of the mountain, which caused the slaughter of the Fianna. 200 or more it put to death in one day.
Then there's the legend of St. Patrick fighting serpents in the next century, around 432 AD. It is said that he drove out the snakes of Ireland, chasing them into the sea after they attacked him during a 40-day fast he was undertaking atop a hill. Additionally, there's the tale of Loch Dreg, where St. Patrick killed a large sea serpent from a pit in the center, turning the water red with its blood. In fact, there are stories of St. Patrick being met by 2 ancient warriors, Quill Macronan and Oisin, during his evangelical travels. The 2 were once members of Finn MacCool's warrior band of serpent slayers in the previous century, and somehow survived long enough to meet St. Patrick. In the story, St. Patrick seeks to convert the warriors to Christianity while they defend their pagan past. Of course, snakes are certainly not chased out of Ireland by St. Patrick, who had nothing to do with Ireland's snake-free status, according to Nigel Monaghan, a historian at the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. He told National Geographic that the area is simply unable to sustain reptiles due to the cold climate and sunless winters. Scholars suggest the tale is allegorical. Serpents are merely a symbol of evil, or perhaps representative of the local pagan faiths. For a region that has no native snake species, the stories of them have permeated Irish culture, wound their way into religious objects, weather divinations, folk legends, and even miracles. Could the snakes perhaps be something else, such as an undiscovered species of aquatic life? Is Mucky the Muckross monster an eel? Or perhaps one of the old gods from ancient Ireland, waiting for Finn to wake from the caves after the third call of the Fionn hunting horn? So every time we go to Glendalough,
Which is in County Wicklow.
yes, every time we go there, you have your St. Patrick rant
What about?
that he's not even Irish.
Yeah, he's not.
Uh,
That's common knowledge.
that
He's from Wales. Well, supposedly he was originally from Wales. The story is that he came over to Ireland as a slave, actually, technically, and then he eventually moved back to Wales. But the story is that he was visited in his dreams by the poor pagan Irish people, and he realized there and then that he had to come back to Ireland and Christianize us.
And you also go on the rant about how he selected the people that they had to come from a particular area because they couldn't be pagan.
He was
He's afraid of spies.
He was afraid that druids at the time were pagans would infiltrate the church. I've only heard this. I don't know how true it is, but yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, obviously Ireland isn't exactly the climate, and everything wouldn't be great for snakes. So it's always seen as an allegory of driving out the snakes out of Ireland is driving out paganism.
Yeah, but then when you go to Glendalough, you see the trees that are planted in the graves, and the one
The
tree
oak trees, yeah, you do, and
that have grown around the headstones.
I've heard that used to be a pagan ritual to plant a tree in a grave that would eventually grow out of the grave into a mighty oak or a mighty tree. But yeah, I mean, who knows? It probably was like a pre-Christian settlement there, and then obviously once Christianity came to Ireland and people became Christian, of course, monks took it over.
Yeah, but where the monks are, there's this one cross that's the headstone that's embedded in the tree that's by the waters.
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful place, and obviously there's the Round Tower and monastic settlement there and everything, and it is quite spectacular.
So have you ever heard of Mucky the Muckross monster?
No, but obviously we were down at Muckross not too long ago, and we did see the lake there.
Yeah, we didn't go exploring too much. I've seen some YouTube videos where people just film the surface, and there are some very large fish that make big splashes in the water, and you can see some it does look like eels just kind of like swimming underneath. So what would be your favorite serpent story in other cultures?
My favorite serpent story. I think a lot of it is obviously an allegory. Like maybe back in, Middle Ages and stuff, they might have come across like the bones of some dinosaur, and obviously, that would have created some huge myths and legends and fears in the minds of people back in those days, and obviously they had to make sense of the world through imagining what those creatures would have looked like. So I can well imagine that that's maybe one of the sources for the idea of serpents and dragons and everything in folklore. But I find it interesting about folklore that it's truth out of the fiction. Obviously the tales themselves, of course, are fictional, but they tell you a greater truth about human nature, and obviously serpents and dragons and everything. It would be fear of the unknown, the dangers out there, I suppose.
I think it's interesting that these snake cultures, that these snake legends exist in multiple cultures, from like ancient Chinese culture about like snakes in the water, to Native American cultures. I think the most fascinating part is that it exists so strongly in this country when there's no fossil records of snakes that exist.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but that's because it's an allegory.
Now, could it be that, the Brigid, the Celtic goddess Brigid, she came over with the Celtic religion, which, was from France to Wales to England to Ireland. Now, could these stories of snakes have been swept up in that tradition, and then just stories of that carried on? Could it just be word of mouth and people migrating and telling these stories of these different creatures from different regions?
Yeah, that's probably a part of it. I mean, there's also, if you're talking about, going back thousands of years, the climate would have been different. There was, as you said, like more migration because of the land bridge between...
Well, the land bridge would have disappeared would have disappeared in the same era that
after the Ice Age.
Yeah, into the Ice Age, when the glacier, previously Ireland was just a solid slab of ice. It was glacial, it was uninhabited. What formed the water of Muckross Lake would have also buried the land bridge, which there's some contest of whether that land bridge was accessible. It's a contested point among historians whether that land bridge connected people as well as some others have stated.
Well, there's always the, just going back to the whole subject of land bridges, there's also the, I don't know how much myth this is or if there's any grains of truth to it, but there's always the tales of Doggerland, which is apparently a marshy land that, that connected Britain to, I think, mainland Europe, that got flooded. And I don't know if they've even done a scan underwater there to see if that was ever, if it's actually true or what, if it's fiction or not.
So St. Patrick in modern Ireland is, kind of commercialized.
Well, it's just St. Patrick's Day.
And plastic.
It's just St. Patrick's Day in the parade.
Why is it St. Patrick's Day? Why is there this great association? Why not the other, Bridget becoming St. Bridget? Why isn't...
We do have actually a day of that. It's just
it's
that
February
not a bank
1st.
holiday. Exactly,
it's symbolic.
Exactly, but it's not a bank holiday.
And it's a true pagan holiday.
Yeah,
it's a true Irish holiday.
It kind of got swept up in Christianity as well, because they had to kind of, I presume this was the case in all countries that Christianity got a foothold in. They had to adapt and they had to incorporate some of the pagan beliefs and pagan customs and cultures.
Right, which is why I say we celebrate February 1st instead of St. Patrick's Day. We do a thing. We do a thing for February 1st.
Yeah, we should. We could always make a St. Bridget's cross.
Yeah, and go watch some go watch a badger's den, snake dens for their emergence.
Yeah. Could be fun.
There's also the shrines, which is just a rock covered with other rocks, and that's St. Bridget's rock.
Indeed.
And then at the National History Museum, you have her shoe shrine, which is just her shoe in a shrine. It's gold. It's a little gold. It's a little gold boot, and it's very tiny. It's like the size of a little child's shoe.
Oh, very nice.
It's got a little Jesus emblazoned on the toe.
Very nice.
And that's St. Bridget's shoe shrine. The culture of shrines, interesting, because it's like the shrine of a hand, and then you have
the guy's head.
Yeah, fingers. There's a couple of fingers preserved. And you have St. Valentine's heart.
Yeah, church.
Yeah.
In Dublin, yeah, that's correct. That's right. And you got Oliver Plunkett's head.
I love going to the National History Museum. That is my favorite museum because in the very, very back, you can walk through all of the early Christian relics, and you can see the reflection of
paganism,
from like if you go to like Newgrange and see all of the symbolism and all of the carvings on the walls and on the rocks outside, and all looking at the use of three through everything, and then you go through and then you're like, did I not see that carved into? And so maybe St. Patrick wasn't quite so successful in weeding out all of the druids.
Snakes. Yeah, well, that's true. And also in the early churches, you know, the really, really early Christian churches, they still had the shieling a gig above the doorway of these churches, and you can often see it. And for those of you that don't know what a shieling a gig is, and
Google it.
Yeah, Google it.